Dear noble ones, today we're going to have fun.
Why? I mean, why? Why on green, red, blue, purple planet Earth does he only have half a visor? I'm sure there is a perfect explanation for it. I just don't happen to have it. Maybe it's because of half swording. You know, when you half sword, you want to have half a helmet, so you know you are consistent. Maybe it just feels bad for the enemy archers, you know, putting all that work and then it just has a helmet to block their arrows and it's just being... breathing, that's what it is. I mean, he's got only half a helmet, so he can enjoy a lovely breeze, and he can breathe. Not sure if he can breed, though. I doubt that passing on your DNA is going to happen with, you know, it's... No, I get it. It's for one of those moments where you're unsure. Should I go visor up? Should I fight visor down? Visor up? Visor down? You know, maybe just had an idea. Hey! No, I get it. Some people go full plate, and others go full lame. Full lame. Who made this film again? Ridley Scott. That's what it is. Aliens. They are aliens. This film is not set on planet Earth. It's set on another planet. They are a completely different species. And what we can understand about the biology of this species is that clearly they don't have their brains in their head. It must be somewhere else in the body. So the head is, you know, one of those things. If you get hit full charge with a lance on your face, that it goes outside the other side, 'tis just a flesh wound. Ridley Scott, you cheeky muppet, having an alien sequel like that. Oh, you know what it is, Metatron? It's just the people want to see the expensive actor's face during combat. Otherwise, you know, they'll get confused. How can people possibly understand who is who if they can't see them in the face? Well, I don't know, just dress them up in completely different colors, like blue and red. I mean, that could wait. Jokes aside, the first time I saw the poster, I actually thought they were using some CGI and that he was actually wearing the full helmet, but somehow you could see through. You know, one of those things that you actually see in video games when your character in one of those RPGs, kind of old style, when you walk behind a tree and then the tree becomes transparent so you could see where the... You know, that's what I thought that they were doing. I mean, how difficult could that be to pull off? I mean, we did land on Mars, so as a species, he's got half a helmet. Do you know what I think? I really think that that's a worse decision than not giving him a faceplate at all. I mean, maybe even just wearing mail would have been, even though the mail in this movie, they just recycled it from the king. And I already made an entire video now about that mail was horrible with the it was the amount of padding underneath that mail. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like they're trying to give this man a run for his money. But literally, even with those mail props that are, well, they are what they are, I think it would have been better than this frigging, what's the bloody point? Anyways, apart from discussing the costume department, which clearly has a lot of trouble, a lot of problems, what about the movie? Because I was watching the trailer with my girlfriend and we were both thinking, you know, I'd like to watch that. That could be an interesting story, and it is based on a true story, although, again, I'm not sure if it should become a criminal offense to actually say that and then put it right next to costume department that... Anyways, still, the film is based on something that really happened, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this duel and how duels worked in the medieval period, because, okay, we understand that the movie is lacking from, you know, the costume department, but what about the actual story that it's telling? For example, there is this scene that I cannot show you, where you have the husband and the wife, and they're talking to each other, and talking about honor, and the reason behind this duel, and why it was happening, trying to preserve honor, and of course, I can't really show you that section, because then my entire video would be demonetized, so I think I'm just gonna reenact it. Pi?
See?
How about we reenact the scene together?
Okay.
Thank you. I'm risking... I'm risking my life. For you! I'm risking my life for you. It's recording.
Okay, is it focused? Oh, oopsie. You're risking my life so that you can save your pride. Is it bad? Is that okay? Is it bad?
No, it's good.
Is it bad acting?
No, it's very nice. You want to say hello?
I feel like it's really bad acting.
So he says, I'm doing it to defend your honor, and she says, you're doing it to defend your own honor. Does that make sense from a medieval perspective, where duels like this, which are called judicial duels, by the way, were they ever done to preserve honor, and how would it have happened? For example, in this case we see that they're both mounted, and then they, go at it, but there is no barrier in between, which we normally do see in jousting events. But this is a specific duel, it's historical, it happened in 1386. Would barriers exist at that time? And who would be witnessing? What was the role of women during these kind of events? And what sort of events existed in the medieval period, and how did people talk about it, and how do we know? Did they always fight until death, or were there other ways? Was there a scoring system? All of this will be answered in this video. Let's find out. Now don't worry, I won't give you any spoilers, I won't tell you who wins the duel, even though it happened almost 700 years ago, so not sure if that would count as a spoiler alert, but hey. This was the last judicial duel permitted by the Parliament of Paris between the Norman knight Jean de Carrouges versus the squire Jacques Le Gris. It happened on December 29th, 1386. The term formal combat is used as an umbrella term to define the sort of combat that was regulated and that happened in the medieval period, and it isn't part of warfare combat. And there were 4 different kinds of formal combat that happened in the medieval period: tournaments, jousts, judicial duels, and foot combats. So, looking at the actual history, so the historical medieval period, were duels ever fought for honor? Is that actually something historical, or is it something made up for the film industry? Well, the British University professor Julian Pitt Rivers, who's also an ethnographer and an anthropologist, gives us the answer. He tells us that in the medieval period, honor had to be vindicated through the display of physical violence. So it is historically accurate to state that perceived wrongs could be corrected through the means of violence. Formal combats were in fact presented as events in which it was possible to both gain and display honor. Also, in the medieval period, the defense of the honor of a woman was one of the reasons why some of these duels happened. And it could have been done for 2 reasons, either out of a sort of chivalric, we could say, motivation to defend the honor of a woman, or for self-interest and self-preservation to defend your own honor, as it was influenced by the honor of the women around you, which is exactly what's being portrayed in the film. So this part, absolutely correct. As we read the medieval chronicles, we understand that generally speaking, when duels are linked to women, it's either for love or for defense of honor. So combats could be presented as opportunities for men to defend the honor of women, or defend their own honor. So who could fight in these events? Well, you can have knights, you can have men-at-arms, you can have squires, because, even in the very duel that we are going to look at for this movie, when the film will be released, well, one of the 2 combatants, Mr. Le Gris, was in fact a squire. Sometimes even kings would take part, but generally speaking, as I said, knights, men-at-arms, squires and kings. We had 2 different kinds of events. You could have private ones and public ones, and when it comes to public events, some of these would be really large-scale events, such as the ones held in 1390 in Smithfield and St. Inglevert. But there was also a 3rd kind of usually duels, and those were secretly held duels. The thing is that even though we have mentions of these, I want to say 99% of cases the crown would frown upon these, and they would be considered illegal, and we do have written records of a king getting really pissed at people for organizing a private, secret duel. Both tournaments, foot combat, jousts and duels have to be seen or perceived as a sort of regulated violence that was usually under the control of the crown. We know that people received in fact invitations. The proclamations of the jousts at Smithfield in 1390, for example, was sent by heralds to various Western European courts. Any knights or squires that wanted to attend had to bring a copy of the documents with them. Okay, so we understand that some people did take part in these sort of judicial duels because they needed to defend the honor of a woman, or defend their own honor. But what are other reasons as to why people fought in the medieval period in jousts, tournaments and all sorts of competitions? Well, there are diverse motivations that intersected. You see, a squire or a knight that would participate in any of these events, they wouldn't just get honor if they won. Of course, you would get a greater sort of honor if you did win, but you would also gain honor just by participating, just by showing that you are ready to do something brave and dangerous, to show martial prowess. You could gain fame, but also there were other sort of practical benefits, if you will. Squires as apprentice and young knights could start gaining experience, so they could both show to other men how good they were, but they could also in general learn some skills that could be very useful on the battlefield. So being always ready and showing that you are good at fighting was also important for a man's career. But formal combats were also an opportunity for material gain. Awards could be made to all who participated, such as the account that according to the Histoire de Charles V, 3 French knights were rewarded for their success, and we're talking about monetary grants, about 2,000 francs each from the king. This happened on the 13th of May 1390. Even the individuals in power who organized and planned these events used it as a way to reinforce their dominant position in terms of wealth, social standing, and martial ability. To give you perspective, imagine one of our modern day politicians actually organizing an MMA event and going down and fighting and winning. Yeah, good luck with that. The regulation of formal combat was done by 3 kinds of authorities: knights, the king, and legal authorities together with their clerks. Attempts to assert authority over formal combat, both by royal and princely control, have been attested. Now, I was mentioning at the beginning of the video that one of the things we don't see in the duel that we see on the film is the fact that there is no barrier in the middle, and we do know that usually whenever you take part at a jousting event or you see jousts, there always is a barrier. So is that a case of historical inaccuracy? Actually, no. The advent of the barrier at the center of a jousting area happens in the 1420s, and the first recorded evidence that that actually happened was from 1430 at Bruges. It is speculated that the concept of the barrier in the middle of between 2 knights galloping against each other was introduced, and it was an invention that came from Portugal. Clearly the reasons are safety on one hand and making sure that the joust event would go on smoothly on the other hand. With a barrier that was usually up to the horse's shoulder, you can ensure that the 2 horses don't actually collide against one another, which of course would be extremely unsafe, but you can also make sure that the 2 horses do run towards each other and don't hesitate. So considering again the fact that the duel happens in 1386 for this specific event, because it's a duel, and also because at the time even in formal jousts barriers wouldn't have happened as far as we understand. But past the 1430s, barriers become ubiquitous all over Europe. Discussing more in details the duel that happened between Jean de Carrouges and Jacques Le Gris, without giving you any spoilers, it's interesting that we can learn quite a lot of things. These kind of duels were called in Latin duellum, although this French word that I have no idea how to pronounce was used in French literature and accounts. Now there was a difference. The French word always refers to legally authorized duels, so duels that had to do within the legal sphere. But duellum was a Latin term that we find in chronicles of the time to mean 2 kinds of duels: those that happened under the influence of the legal authorities and those that didn't. But another thing that we can learn about formal combat in the medieval period is that it could happen in 2 different ways. Lots of 2s in here. You could have combat that was fought until a certain amount of strikes were delivered that would be decided first, and after you would be hit a few times, then you would be considered defeated, and if you managed to hit that amount of times your opponent, then you would be the winner. Or if one of the 2 was just put to the ground or thrown to the ground. But sometimes duels would be fought to try and hurt the other person, and these could be fought until death or incapacitation, or until one of the 2 combatants just couldn't continue to fight, or if a judge interrupted the event. In the case of a judicial duel, both could happen, but generally speaking, the one with a set amount of strikes that didn't have the aim of actually killing the other person was the most common. Of course, in the case of the film, we are talking about one of those judicial duels that was instead very, very violent. What's also interesting is that, generally speaking, when talking about formal combat, even during times of war and during times of peace, you could always choose the kind of weapons that you were going to use. In fact, we have descriptions of knights actually selecting the kind of weapons they wanted to use. Weapons of war if they touched the shield where the weapons of war were stored, or weapons of peace if they touched the other shield. It was something that they could choose. And when we say weapons of war, we of course mean sharp weapons, the same that you would use on the battlefield, whereas when we talk about weapons of peace, we're talking about the dull version. Both kind of weapons could have been used for both types of combat, whether you wanted to just fight with a certain amount of strikes, or whether you wanted to actually fight until death. The reason why this specific duel is called the last duel is because it was the last duel that was authorized to settle legal matters by the Parliament of Paris. So, what was the role of women in these kind of combat situations, both whether it be jousting or whether it be a duellum? In the movie we see that the lady in question is actually watching the fight, and that is very historically accurate. But women didn't only have a passive role in these sort of situations, and we can learn that again by reading the chronicles, both written by the clergy, that usually were meant to be privately read just inside abbeys and monasteries, or written by the lay that instead were more of a public account, so to speak. We do have accounts that talk about the jousts that happened in October 1390, where we get a full-on description of how the jousting event was preceded by a procession. In these processions, a certain amount of ladies, equal to the amount of knights that were participating in combat, were preceding the knights, and they were also wearing clothes that had the same colors or matched with the heraldic colors worn by the knights. These, of course, would be the Queen's ladies, so people of importance. Women were also prize givers, and they could be in charge of actually judging, so being the judge of the event, deciding which knight would be given victory. But a woman had many more roles when it came to these kind of events. They needed to be witnesses, they needed to observe, watch the knights fighting. Oftentimes, and we see this again repeated over and over again in medieval literature, they were also the reason why some knights decided to fight. So gaining the favor of an important woman was one of the reasons why some of these knights decided to fight, and sometimes it was the women themselves, women of importance and nobility, that even asked knights to perform duties of martial duties, including fighting in informal combat, sometimes even giving them a helmet themselves to ask them bring glory to this helmet. Talking about how important it was to not only have a visor but keep it down, we have got period mentions of a situation like that, which is very interesting. There was a joust during a large diplomatic gathering in 1435. During this joust, a knight by the name of Merlo decided to fight with his visor up, and we do have reference of all the other knights telling him, no, that's insane, keep the visor down, but he decided not to do it. And interestingly enough, again in the narrative, we are told that afterwards, because of the fact that he still was unscathed, because he fought very well, he was then praised for his courage because of how dangerous it was to fight with your visor up. Again, that gives us perspective as to why the half a visor situation is extremely stupid and medieval people would have really frowned upon it. Now that we've talked about those who participated in the form of combat and those who organized the event and even those who spoke about it and wrote about it, what about the audience? Who could participate and watch such a formal event, whether it be tournament, jousts or duels? Let's find out. So what we can learn from period sources is that the kind of people that could become an audience largely depended on in what political situation the joust or event was happening. If it was during a time of war, that only people belonging to the military, so only knights and martial men could watch. During times of peace instead, loads of different people could participate. Now of course you would have queens and kings and all of nobility, but you would also have merchants and just civil common people. In fact, these kind of events were considered great to try and intermingle a little bit at least with the nobility and high nobility, particularly if you were a merchant or in general someone who needed to try and gain the attention of people of importance. sometimes the audience was mostly passive and watching the event, but other times they were also part of this sort of pageantry that anticipated the event and that happened afterwards, as many times you would have feasts after the, 2 or 3 days event, jousting and combat, had taken place. As a final piece of trivia, I'd like to add the fact that increasing your fame and reputation were very, very important. Sometimes some knights decided to participate in disguise. And usually in the accounts this happens in a really cool way. And we do have written accounts that tell us that sometimes some of these knights that participated in disguise just presented themselves instead of their names as the Red Knight, the White Knight, the Black Knight. This oftentimes resulted in having more of the attention of the public, because people started to get curious, and oftentimes at the end of the event the knight would reveal his face, showing them, oh, it was this man all along. Alright, noble ones, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found this information interesting and perhaps can help you appreciate the movie more when you actually watch it, and I really hope that they give him another piece of the faceplate, because that looks extremely silly. But if you enjoyed this video and you like these kind of reviews, please become a noble one, subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.